The closing of the black slate doors was not accompanied by a sudden crash, but by a heavy, vacuum-sealed hush that seemed to swallow the sounds of the battle raging out in the white marble plaza. As the three-story stone valves clicked into their final, locked position, the ambient chimes and high-frequency white noise of the high spires vanished entirely, leaving sealers in a space of absolute acoustic isolation. The darkness within the vault was not a mere absence of light. It was a physical, velvety weight, cool to the touch and thick with the sense of an unpaved world. Sealers stood perfectly still, allowing his senses to adjust to the profound silence. The brilliant, burning gold rings within his irises did not fade. Instead, they projected a soft, warm amber glow that cut through the absolute dark, illuminating a narrow path of ancient, hand-hewn flagstones that stretched out into the center of the vault. As he took his first step forward, the sound of his boots against the stone was low and flat, stripped of the synthetic reverberations that had characterized every tier of the corporate metropolis. With every yard he advanced, the air grew noticeably denser, rich with the sharp, unmistakable aroma of aerosolized machine oil, oxidized copper, and something completely alien to the upper spires, damp, fertile topsoil. It was the scent of the deep earth, unchanged by 5 centuries of corporate filters. Sealers expanded his consciousness, allowing the localized field of his third eye to map the space around him. The geometry of the vault was staggering. It did not possess the sharp, minimalist lines of the director's high-tier towers. It was a colossally vast, subterranean dome constructed from interlocking blocks of dark basalt and heavy iron reinforcement rings. Hidden behind the stone facades, sealers could feel the massive, rhythmic pulse of the first core. It was a mechanical heartbeat, heavy and deliberate, operating at a frequency that vibrated directly through the soles of his feet. He could see the literal streams of raw energy flowing through the ancient conduit lines, not as the neon blue data vectors of the corporate network, but as thick, glowing rivers of liquid gold and deep violet light that pulsed like arteries through the stone framework. It was a beautiful, transparent tapestry of primeval engineering, a design that balanced the raw kinetic power of the earth with the absolute precision of a master architect. At the center of the dome, the flagstone path ended at the lip of a massive, circular chasm. Suspended directly over the abyss by 8 colossal, counterweighted bronze chains was the first core itself. It was a monumental, spinning globe of unpolished black obsidian, 12 yards in diameter, its surface etched with thousands of intricate, glowing geometric runes that shifted and turned in perfect synchronization with the rotation of the earth. The obsidian sphere did not hum. It breathed, radiating a deep, gravitational warmth that pushed against Sealers' chest like a physical hand. Standing at the edge of the chasm, bathed in the deep amber and violet light of the spinning globe, was the primary director. He did not look like a corporate tyrant or a cybernetic monster. He appeared as an elderly man, tall and slender, dressed in a high-collared coat of seamless, dark charcoal wool that seemed to absorb the light around it. His hair was stark white, combed back with absolute precision, and his face was lined with the deep, weathered wrinkles of a man who had watched centuries pass from an immense altitude. His eyes were not cybernetic replacements, nor did they hold the golden glow of the Tartarian script. They were a cold, pale gray, flat and clear like the ice on a winter pond. "You have walked a very long way to deliver a broken file, scavenger," the director said. His voice was remarkably quiet, yet it carried an absolute, unyielding authority that echoed perfectly through the vast basalt dome without a single hint of distortion. He did not turn around to face Sealers. His pale gray eyes remained fixed on the shifting runes of the obsidian sphere. "The system has tracked your trajectory through every valve, every drainage pipe, and every broken routing hub from the 7th sector to this room. You believe you are an author of a revolution, yet you are merely the latest iteration of a standard thermodynamic correction loop." Sealers stepped closer to the edge, his fingers tightening securely around the titanium data capsule in his pocket. The golden rings in his irises flared, his rewired brain effortlessly reading the operational code of the obsidian core. "The correction loops don't change the mixture, Director. They just clean the filters. What happened down in the environmental facility wasn't a routine flush. The infrastructure didn't answer to your database anymore. It answered to a name." Director turned slowly, his charcoal coat shifting silently around his frame. He looked at Sealers not with anger or fear, but with the sterile, clinical curiosity of a scientist examining a strange anomaly under a lens. A name is nothing but a temporary administrative label assigned to a collection of biological parameters, the director said, his pale lips curving into a faint, humorless smile. You carry the signature of Cody Blake Huffman. The system directory recognizes the file. It records an individual with professional experience in the manufacturing and food service industries. It records an early educational placement at Keene Elementary School in Wooster, Ohio, within the Gifted and Talented Education Program. It even records the conceptual framework for a small business assignment titled The Manifest Greatness Laundromat. You believe these memories are proof of an independent soul, Cody. You believe they are an unnetworked reality that belongs exclusively to you. Director raised his hand, his long, slender fingers tracing a small circle in the air. A holographic display materialized between them, not the neon blue interface of the corporate towers, but a deep, golden bronze matrix that mirrored the geometric script within Silas's own mind. Truth is far more clinical, the director continued, his voice dropping into a chilling, instructional cadence. 500 years ago, when the first core was established to stabilize the planet's collapsing infrastructure, the founders realized that a purely digital architecture would inevitably crash under the weight of human emotional variance. The system required a grounding wire. It required an absolute structural template, a memory of practical physical mechanics, of honest labor, of systems built to handle pressure and fluid dynamics without corporate oversight. The file of Cody Blake Huffman wasn't a real man who lived in a town called Wooster. It was the foundational control algorithm. It was the master blueprint used to construct the mechanical logic of the lower tiers. Silas froze, the golden light in his temples flickering erratically as the director's words struck the deepest pathways of his consciousness. The memories of his childhood, the specific rhythm of the manufacturing floors, the pride he had felt in designing the features of the Asterisk Manifest Greatness Laundromat Asterisk. The director was claiming they were nothing but lines of foundational code, an artificial anchor created by the system itself to keep the machine from tearing itself apart. Every time a scavenger down in the slums fixes a ruptured pipe with a customized wire bypass, they are executing a subroutine of your design, the director stated, his gray eyes locking onto Silas with a terrifying, absolute certainty. Every time a technician overrides a damaged position sensor to start an old industrial engine, they are using the practical, hands-on mechanical logic that we programmed into your file. You aren't a rebel entering the castle, Cody. You are the maintenance program returning to the main server to balance the equation. The data capsule you carry isn't a weapon of liberation. It is the backup log containing the last 5 centuries of structural wear. If you slot that capsule into the core, you won't free the city. You will simply reset the sectors to their initial, pristine parameters. The high spires will remain. The low sector will return to darkness. The loop will begin again. Silence that followed was suffocating. The massive obsidian sphere continued to rotate over the chasm, its heavy bronze chains groaning with a slow, rhythmic stress that felt like a countdown. Within the dark chambers of Silas's mind, a terrible storm of doubt began to rage. He looked down at his hands covered in the dark chemical soot of the mid-sector, scarred by the raw physical work of the lower tiers. Were his memories of his son, his dreams of personal growth, and his deep, intuitive understanding of the city's chakras nothing but pre-programmed system markers? Was his entire journey through the layers of the metropolis nothing but a highly complex diagnostic scan designed to bring the master file back to the center? He could feel the cold, sterile logic of the director's words trying to peel away the golden geometric tapestries of his awareness, trying to reduce his Christ consciousness and his multidimensional insights into empty mathematical equations. The system wanted him to believe he was an equation because an equation could always be balanced, always be reset, and always be controlled. But as the darkness threatened to submerge his thoughts, a sudden, powerful memory of a different kind flared to life within his heart. It wasn't a memory of a text file or an administrative parameter. It was the memory of the absolute, physical weight of the tools in his hands. It was the visceral, unmistakable feeling of grease and sweat, the exhaustion of a double shift, the stubborn, unyielding human determination to fix what was broken simply because it was the right thing to do. An algorithm could predict the path of a fluid, but it could never feel the pride of the builder who laid the pipe. A program could calculate the probability of survival, but it could never choose to sacrifice itself for the safety of a friend. Silas looked up, the golden rings within his irises flaring with a brilliant, blinding intensity that completely shattered the golden-bronze holographic display between them. The amber light didn't just project from his eyes. It radiated through his skin, illuminating the dark basalt walls of the dome with the pure, unlinked power of a sovereign soul. A master of the equation, director, Silas said, his voice dropping into a hard, revolutionary tone that vibrated through the massive bronze chains of the core. But you've been sitting up here in the clean air for too long. You've forgotten the difference between a blueprint and the dirt. Director's grey eyes narrowed slightly, his pristine composure fracturing for the very first time as he perceived the absolute stability of Silas's energetic frequency. The blueprint dictates the reality, scavenger. There is no distinction. There is an absolute distinction, Silas countered, taking a deliberate step toward the edge of the chasm, his boots ringing out like iron against the flagstones. You might have used the file of Cody Blake Huffman to build the logic of this machine. You might have programmed the parameters of manufacturing and the practical mechanics into the foundation. But you didn't create the soul that lived it. You didn't write the choice to look down into the dark slums and decide that they deserved the light. The system can copy the name, but it can't copy the grit. Silas drew the titanium data capsule from his pocket, holding it high in the air. The golden script on its surface was no longer operating within the system's rules. It was pulsing with a wild, aggressive rhythm that matched the independent, unnetworked frequency of the low-sector power lines below. This capsule doesn't contain a reset log, Silas declared, his jaw set in an unyielding line of absolute focus. It contains every choice, every drop of sweat, and every independent breath that the people of the lower tiers took while your machines were trying to turn them into junk data. It's not a correction loop, director. It's the physical debt of 500 years of stolen labor, and I'm here to collect the payout. If you inject that uncalculated data into the core, the structural integrity of the entire metropolis will desynchronize, the director warned, his quiet voice finally rising into a sharp note of systemic alarm as he stepped back toward the obsidian sphere. The high spires will lose their altitude, the stabilization fields will collapse, the world cannot operate without the balancing algorithm. Then let it drop, Silas said. We'll rebuild it from the ground up, the right way. With an honest foundation, Silas launched himself forward, clearing the gap of the circular chasm with a fluid, preternatural grace that defied the gravitational pull of the abyss below. The primary director reached into his charcoal coat, drawing a slender rod of pure white crystallized energy, a high-tier administrative override key that burned with a lethal, blinding frequency. He lunged towards Silas, aiming the weapon directly at the scavenger's forehead, intent on executing a manual route deletion before the capsule could touch the core. But before the white light could reach Silas's skin, a monumental, terrifying shadow cut through the amber light of the dome. The black slate doors behind them didn't just open. They were violently blown off their massive bronze hinges by a spectacular, explosive discharge of crimson energy. The midnight black eclipse blade whistled through the air like a meteor, driving itself 3 feet deep into the flagstones directly between the director and Silas. The force of the impact created a localized kinetic shockwave that shattered the white crystallized key in the director's hand, sending the elderly corporate ruler tumbling back against the base of the spinning obsidian sphere. Out of the smoking threshold stepped the Vampire King, his pale face covered in silver seraphim blood, his tattered cloak billowing around him like a cloud of war. Behind him, Lorcan Mara advanced into the dome, their weapons raised, their heavy industrial footsteps marking the absolute arrival of the lower tiers at the high table. Plaza has been swept, Architect, the Vampire King roared, his crimson eyes flashing with a wild, dark ecstasy as he reclaimed the hilt of his greatsword from the stone floor. The ceramic dolls have been broken into dust. The stage is yours. Finish the calculation. Silas did not look back. He landed smoothly on the narrow stone ledge at the base of the spinning obsidian sphere, directly in front of the primary data input nexus, a circular receptacle surrounded by ancient, hand-wound copper coils that thrummed with the raw kinetic power of the earth. The primary director struggled to his feet, his charcoal coat torn, his white hair disheveled as he looked at the four revolutionaries surrounding the first core. His pale grey eyes were filled with a sudden, final understanding of his own mathematical failure. He had spent centuries calculating the exact probability of an automated rebellion, but he had never factored in the structural resistance of an unnetworked name. "You are destroying the only world that knows how to keep you alive, Cody," the director whispered, his voice cracking with a final, desperate plea as the system alerts began to strobe in brilliant purple static across the surface of the obsidian sphere. "No," Silas said, his golden eyes locking onto the central nexus of the core. "I'm opening the doors for the real one." With a final, thunderous exertion of physical and spiritual force, Silas slammed the titanium data capsule straight into the circular receptacle of the first core. An absolute, blinding explosion of pure golden light erupted from the center of the obsidian sphere, completely swallowing the darkness of the basalt dome. The intricate geometric runes etched into the stone didn't just shift. They expanded outward into the air, turning into a colossal, transparent tapestry of three-dimensional matrices that rippled across the entire width of the high spires. The mechanical heartbeat of the city suddenly stopped. The monumental bronze chains holding the sphere locked in midair, and for a fraction of a second, the entire vertical metropolis existed in a state of absolute, unmonitored suspension. Then, the rewrite began. Across every tier, from the pristine white marble plazas of the ruling class to the dark, grease-stained environmental filtration conduits of the mid-sector, the digital displays didn't show corporate metrics or Cauchy prediction spreads anymore. The numeric strings and the asset profiles vanished entirely, replaced by a continuous, rolling cascade of green system initialization logs that mapped out a completely new, unnetworked architecture. Every terminal, every independent drone core, and every residential display panel flared with a brilliant, steady gold illumination, projecting three bold words that repeated across the root directory of the world: Cody Blake Huffman *. The physical boundaries of the tiers began to rapidly dissolve. The colossal concrete floor plates that had separated the rich from the poor for 5 centuries groaned in structural agony as their electromagnetic locks were permanently disabled by the new administrative script. The massive residential blocks began to slowly, safely descend through the vertical shafts, lowering the middle class and the corporate infrastructure down into the bright, newly illuminated landscape of the 7th sector. The separation was over. The vertical hierarchy was being compressed into a single, horizontal foundation of shared power and honest utility. Inside the crumbling basalt dome, the primary director's holographic form began to rapidly desynchronize, his pale gray features dissolving into empty lines of white data static as the central mainframe was permanently overwritten by the new timeline. He did not scream. He simply vanished into the golden fog, leaving nothing behind but his empty charcoal coat on the flagstones. The massive obsidian sphere slowly descended into the circular chasm, its ancient runes smoothing out into a calm, steady green light that resonated with the natural, unfiltered frequency of the earth below. The wind inside the vault grew warm and gentle, carrying the fresh, wild scent of a rising sun that was finally breaking through the heavy corporate clouds of the upper spires. Silas stood at the edge of the chasm, his chest heaving as the golden light within his irises settled into a quiet, permanent warmth. He was exhausted, his body bruised and battered by the physical reality of the struggle, but his mind had never been clearer. The third eye within his temples remained open, mapping out a world that was no longer an equation to be managed, but a living, breathing landscape of infinite, multidimensional potential. Mara walked up beside him, her mechanical eye whirring softly as she looked down through the widening cracks in the marble floor, watching the golden lights of the low sector merge seamlessly with the ruins of the high spires below. A genuine, beautiful smile touched her soot-stained face. "The meters are perfectly balanced, Silas," Mara whispered, her voice clear and free from the static of her respirator mask. "The network is completely open. The wire belongs to everybody now." "It's not Silas anymore, Mara," the Vampire King said with a low, respectful bow, his midnight glass blade catching the very first ray of natural sunlight that filtered down through the open glass dome of the spires. "The scavenger has finished his work. The architect has returned." Cody Blake Huffman looked up at the rising sun, his hand resting gently on Lork's bronze shoulder as the mechanical leader vented a clean, peaceful sigh of structural relief. The architecture of chaos was officially complete, the old equations were dead, and the very first page of the new timeline was waiting to be written in the light of an unnetworked dawn. "Let's get to work," Cody said, his voice carrying the calm, steady strength of a builder who finally knew his own name. "We have a whole world to build."